would like to share one of the pillars with one of the practical things you could do? Who would like to share one? Yes. Do we have a microphone, please? Can we get a microphone here?
I can be loud. I used to be a teacher.
No, that's all right. No, let's get a microphone. Because this is being recorded as well.
This is related to James 3:17. The importance of correcting and coaching employees without humiliating them. Doing it with mercy and kindness so that they don't feel crushed.
Excellent. That is excellent. So I'm going to share with you a story. A couple years ago, I was invited to the President's Prayer Breakfast. And it was an honor. I'll never go again. And here's why. I was so profoundly frustrated by the hypocrisy of the two members of Congress who stood up, one a Republican, one a Democrat, and both of them said, "Oh, we so love our Wednesday morning Bible study because we have the most toxic work environment in the world, and for that hour we can talk to each other and pray and blah, blah." And I thought, fix it if you have a toxic environment. Only you can fix it. Most of us who work in companies and there's a toxic environment can do very little other than our best on an individual basis to try to be salt and light. Those knuckleheads can fix it. And I was so infuriated by that. But it's really important to remember that there's no excuse for a toxic work environment. Not if we're Christians. And it's very easy for Christians to get sucked into gossip and backbiting and tribalism and obstruction, right? We sometimes forget that we're Christians at work. So that was an excellent example. How do you coach someone? How do you give someone, constructive criticism without making them feel bad about themselves? To do it in a merciful, loving way. Excellent. Another one. Another example. I know you all did the assignment. I heard you talking. Who would like to give one? Yes.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
That Republican and Democrat,
Yeah.
did you consider going to them and telling them why you were frustrated with what they had to say?
If I could have gotten to them, I would have. If you've never been to the President's Prayer Breakfast, you know what I mean. You don't know what I mean, but it's a difficult environment. But that's a good point. Yeah.
But appointment with them and saying, I just never wanted to go back to the prayer breakfast after such and such.
Good point. I will do that. I will do that.
Good.
I will do that. That's great. I will do that because it's been bothering me ever since, and I should tell them. It's been. Sorry. Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. That's a great thing. By the way, we're going to have Q&A later. Any other questions or any other comments about this assignment? Someone else give me another pillar and another practical application of the pillar. There's lots of them. In fact, in the book, this is a plug for the book, chapter 10, I unpack all of these. And I give actual real-life examples for all of them. But I want to hear what you have to say. How about this table over here? What'd you guys come up with? Anything? If you don't volunteer, I'm going to pick on you. Oh, we got one in the back over here? Okay, you got reprieved, but I'm coming back to you, so.
The A+ table is over here, I'm just going to say. I was struck by what you're saying because of what happened in my life. At this month last year, my husband went to work, and I'd gotten some difficult medical news. And at the end of the day, he's been working there 20 years. His boss pulled him in the office and said, "This is what we're going to do." He was working on, and still continues to work on, a $600 million project. Single biggest project for the company. It's in DC. And his boss said, "You know what? Yes, it's big, but Gina needs you for medical. She's your priority. And then when she's all well, this job will still be here."
That's it. Incredible. That's awesome.
It's incredible.
That's awesome. I had a very similar experience in my own life. I went to work for a company called Steelcase. I was with the company about 3 weeks, and my wife became very ill, ended up a month in the hospital. And the company was self-insured, and I was with them 3 weeks. They had every right to say, "Bye, we owe you nothing. Sorry, bad timing." They let me set up an office in my house. This was before laptops, okay? You should have seen the thing they gave me for a laptop. It looked like a suitcase. But they let me, because I had 3 small children at home, for a month they let me work out of my house because my wife was in the hospital 3 weeks. So I always tell people, if you work for a company like that, man, you are really blessed. And you know what happens? You create a virtuous culture in the business. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Let's have one more. You guys come up with one? You want to share?
We mentioned that it is so important, the moral and the ethics of business. And how do we teach that? We don't have any great answers, but it needs to start at young kids in the family atmosphere. And then it can grow up into where they go into corporations. But I'm real concerned about our schools right now, particularly our colleges, even our high schools and on down, what they're teaching our kids. So we as parents and adults really need to work on that. And then, I look at corporations, the Hobby Lobby, the Green Family, Chick-fil-A, some of these corporations, we need more of these, but yet the society today badmouths or mocks them.
Well,
it's really sad.
Let me tell you, I agree 100% with what you just said. However, I would also say, we can't expect all businesses to be Christian businesses. So what are we going to do to be salt and light in the businesses we're in? And something like wisdom is a universal concept. That's why I say it falls under common grace. So you don't have to be a Christian, right, to understand the concept of purity, right? The word hagios in the Greek means actually holy from within. So the best way to teach our children and to teach the people in our workplaces is to model hagios. If we model hagios, it becomes irresistible. You had a comment in the back.
Comment on what the man had said, that you can't teach it, you have to model it.
Yeah.
God is not, and I think we've sort of abdicated some of our responsibility, whether it be expecting our schools or Sunday school to teach our kids. You have to model it because kids are watching. And the Bible would explain to us that you can take a child in a pagan society, and if that child is informed right, that child can impact the society not impact the child. And you have Joseph, you have Daniel. So what happens at the dinner table can really impact more what happens in school.
Absolutely. Did anyone do the second one, peacefulness? Did anyone do that one? No? You nodding your head? Do you want to share what you came up with? Can we get the mic over there?
We were talking, I guess, about kind of some specific situations where we may be in a meeting with someone we know we disagree with, and it's maybe early in our careers we knew we were right, and it became a conflict, but by understanding the idea of peace, we can actually listen first. And I think all 3 of us had situations where by listening first, the other person almost gave out of steam at some point and would actually express appreciation in a way for the way we were engaging. And it would bring it to a point where we could actually have a more, I don't know if it's rational or not, but a real discussion between 2 people instead of my position versus your position.
Excellent.
And I think peace is there.
Excellent. So let me tell you something else about that word, peacefulness in the scripture in James. The Greek word eirene can actually be translated welfare. And if you look at Jeremiah 29, God says to the Israelites who've been taken captive, seek the welfare of the city, because in the city's prosperity is your prosperity. So, when we think of welfare, we think of, handouts and things of that nature. But the biblical understanding of welfare is flourishing. It's the equivalent of the Hebrew word shalom. It's a much bigger word, And this notion of that kind of welfare, shalom, welfare for the sake of the whole community, is not just Hebraic in nature. You might recognize this from a certain document, We the People of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, procure the common welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do hereby enact this Constitution of the United States. That is a fundamental American value. That kind of welfare, that we seek the welfare of the city. We seek human flourishing. It's a really important concept. So again, in the book, I unpack every single one of those, and I hope if you read the book, you'll start seeing opportunities in your own life. I mentioned supply chain relations as one of the possibilities you could have addressed. I gave the example yesterday at lunch about the Mars Corporation. When I was at Oxford University at Said Business School, I happened to be in the meeting, in the room, when Said and Mars Corporation decided that they were going to do the research and the write-up into what Mars had created voluntarily, which they called the ethic of mutuality. And they decided as a company, and this is really important, they said, we are a very successful company. We have profits in the billions. How much is enough? How much is enough? Because they knew that in their supply chain, there were cocoa farmers that were barely surviving. And the communities where those cocoa farms were had no schools, had no running water, had no hospitals, had no women's health care, had no education. How much is enough? So they set out to create a supply chain and even a sales and distribution channel that ensured that everybody who was connected to the Mars Corporation wasn't just surviving, they were flourishing. That's good capitalism, folks. That's good capitalism. I promise you that. So let's move on, because in addition to wisdom, we have the virtues. I want to talk about first the so-called cardinal virtues. Now, those of you who remember your Aristotle from when you were in school, you know that Aristotle codified these cardinal virtues of prudence and justice and courage and temperance. And it was St. Thomas Aquinas who reclassed them within the context of Christianity. And some of the definitions that both Aristotle and Aquinas come up with are truly sublime. And when we understand what those things really are, we recognize that there's a place for them in business. In fact, they should be at the center of business. And if they had been at the center of business at Lehman Brothers, for instance, Lehman Brothers would still be operating today. Dick Fuld would still have a job. And the first one is this: prudence is not mere caution, as we think of it in the common vernacular. Prudence is actually knowing what to want and what not to want. Think about that. Knowing what to want and what not to want. How many businesses ask themselves that question? And shouldn't they? Because if the default is the ethical egoism of we just want to make as much money as possible, we're going down a very dangerous road. When the Mars Corporation asked themselves that question, what they said they wanted was flourishing across the whole channel. So prudence, which is broken up into 8 parts, which I won't go into today, it'll take forever, does incorporate some of these things like remembering your past and respecting it, and having an open mind to the future and not fearing it. At Gordon Conwell, where I teach, we are faced with the dilemma that this institution, which has a worldwide reputation for excellence, is in a sector that has been dramatically disrupted by technology. What do we want? What don't we want? Because what we can do is we can't keep doing what we did in the 19th century and in the 20th century, because the 21st century is very different. But what we don't want to ever give up is our core values. and our commitment to the Word. So we are constantly asking ourselves this question: what do we want? What do we not want? In business, in economics, in public policy, we should be asking ourselves these questions. The next one is justice. Justice, very simply put, is the mean between self-interest and the interest of the other. That's all it is. It's the mean between self-interest and the interest of the other. What is fair? What is reasonable? Not what can I get away with. I can tell you in my own business experience, anytime a negotiation breaks down into I win, you lose, the result is always short-lived and always ends up costing money. Every time. That's why trade wars, for instance, are a bad idea. The reason why trade wars are a bad idea is because there's a winner and there's a loser. That's what wars are about. The fact of the matter is, if you can negotiate a peace without having to go to war, if you can find a win-win, everybody, by definition, wins. That was one of the things the Bretton Woods conference, by the way, was designed to overcome. Because in the lead up to World War II, it was trade wars and currency manipulation that led to the war. It was trade wars and currency manipulation that led to the Second World War, more than anything else. So, justice means what is reasonable, what is fair, between parties, between persons, what is proportional. Proportionality is a very important concept. If you've ever studied the just war tradition, you know that one of the elements of the just war is the response proportional, right? If somebody pokes you in the eye, you're not allowed to take out a bazooka and blow them away. It has to be proportional. That's part of justice. In business, so often, we try to squeeze our suppliers. And I give examples in the book, by the way, of companies that have squeezed their suppliers so much that they've put them out of business and ended up having to pay more money for the very same parts that they could have had at a reasonable price if they hadn't put their supplier out of business. And a lot of enlightened companies, as I'm sure you know, are abandoning that concept. And they're going more to negotiated purchasing agreements because it's fair, it's just, it's equitable. The next is courage. Courage is best defined as moral fortitude. And what I love about what Aquinas says is, it's the willingness to oppose that which is at enmity with virtue itself. What a great definition of courage. Paul Tillich, the very liberal theologian, whose Christology I do not recommend, but whose understanding of courage in a classic book called The Courage to Be, where he sets out the existential nature of courage, he says this: courage is the self-affirmation of being in spite of the fact of non-being. It is the act of the individual self in taking the anxiety of non-being upon itself by affirming itself. In the anxiety of guilt and condemnation, every courage to be has openly or covertly a religious root, for religion is the state of being grasped by the power of being itself. In other words, if you have the courage to face death because you know that you are saved in Christ, you have the courage to face anything else life throws at you. He just said it the way a philosopher says it. But that's what he's saying. We as Christians should have the courage to take a stand against anything that opposes virtue itself. And in business, that's hard to do. I'll give you an example from my own life again. I was in a meeting. I was responsible for the entire world outside of North America for this business. A large multi-billion-dollar company. There was a factory in Mexico that we were closing in order to build another factory in Mexico, a couple hundred miles away. Now, there were good business reasons to do it. But in Mexico, the law says that the workers of the factory being closed have the right to petition the government to force the company to show cause, to ensure that the jobs where they were couldn't have been saved economically. That's a reasonable thing. It's written in law. The workers have the right to exercise that. That's just life in the big city. Well, we were closing one factory, building another, and some of the employees got together and filed a petition with the government forcing the company to show cause. Now, we had no problem showing cause. There was a very sound economic reason for doing what we were doing, and we offered people the opportunity to relocate and blah, blah, blah. But the delay was costing us money. So we had a conference call. We had corporate counsel, we had corporate finance, we had corporate HR, and little old me running the business. And I said, just weather the storm. Weather the storm. And guess what? I was overruled. They decided to freeze the pay of the people who were making the petition just to squeeze them. Knowing that we were going to win the appeal and we'd have to pay them that money anyway, but they wanted to see if they could end it faster by squeezing them. It took some courage to stand up to corporate counsel and finance and HR. But I lost. I lost. So there's no question I paid a price. Sometimes you have to be willing to pay the price to stand up for what you believe in. And then the next question is, what do you do next? Do you fall on your sword and say, I'm leaving this company because it's immoral? Or do you say, at least I planted the seed for the next time because they know I'm going to be in their face the next time? And maybe we moved the needle. Because if we abandon companies to non-Christians because we Christians don't always get our way, what are we doing? We're surrendering when they need our salt and light more than ever. So I decided to stay. And I said to a cohort of mine who was on that phone call, the one other person who sided with me, there were probably 8 people on the call, the main people I told you about. And I said, hey, you know what? We put our stake in the ground. And he was a Christian as well. We put our stake in the ground. That's not always easy to do. And by the way, I can give you examples where I didn't have courage. I'm not blowing my own horn. I can give you plenty of examples where I didn't have courage. But if we're going to have ethical businesses, if we're going to have a redeemed form of capitalism, people like you and me are going to have to take a stand sometime for what we believe to be right. And then last is temperance. This virtue of all the virtues is the one that is most lost in our society today, in my opinion. Temperance is not seen as a virtue anymore. Moderation in all things is not seen as a virtue. Everything is bigger, 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 more, more, more. And if you talk about temperance, if you talk about doing okay with less, people look at you like you're a fool. Right? The one with the most toys wins. You've ever seen that bumper sticker? What a dumb thing to say. The ones with the most toys still dies. Temperance is a really, really, really important virtue. Because lack of temperance is one of the reasons why we are trillions of dollars in debt. Lack of temperance is one of the reasons why we're trillions of dollars in debt. But here's the thing. These so-called cardinal virtues, other people have written about in the context of business. One of the things that's a little bit different about this book is I also believe we can use the theological virtues. And here are the theological virtues. They are faith, hope, and love. And I say that because even though we call them theological, in fact, they are universal as well. It's just that we call them theological because we know that they emanate from God. And in fact, one of the reasons why we're in the mess we're in, not just economically but politically, is because people have lost faith. We need faith. For believers, it starts with faith in God, but even people who are non-believers need faith. They need faith in something bigger than themselves. They need faith in something outside themselves. I was at a conference or an event a few years ago just outside of Oxford, and I was asked to talk about the existence of God. What are the arguments for and against the existence of God, etc. So that was no small task. And I started out by asking this simple question. I said, is there anyone in this room who does not order their lives according to a faith proposition? And some young guy put his hand up. Poor kid. I live by facts, not faith. Ever see that bumper sticker? I live by facts, not faith. I said, really? I said, have any money? Yeah. I said, what do you got? Takes out a 5-pound note. I said, I'll bet you that 5 pounds that I can prove to you in the next 3 minutes that you indeed order your life according to a faith proposition. Deal? Deal. And I explained the concept of fiat money. And the fact that the objective reality was that was just a piece of ink-stained paper. He only carried around because he had faith that if he presented it in a shop, he would get goods and services back. But in fact, if the world were to lose faith in the pound, and the pound crashed and there was hyperinflation, it would not be good enough to light a cigar with. And I took the 5-pound note and I put it in my pocket. That was everybody's response. I gave it back to the kid. But it's true, you see. Our whole economic system is built on faith. Sometimes we call it business confidence. But it's all faith. The whole fractional banking system is built on faith. And faith breeds hope. This is also missing. This is why the millennials, so many of them, are skeptical about capitalism. They've lost hope. They don't see how the system is going to help them. So we need to give them faith in the institutions and in the system so that they don't lose hope. Because if we lose hope, that's when we turn to those other systems. That's when we turn to the utopian alternatives, and that's when we get into trouble. And guess what? Our whole economic system is also built on hope. How many of you are in the investment, any here in the investment banking or any of those businesses? No? Any of you own stock, shares? Okay. Why would a person risk their assets, their money, their wealth to invest in stocks? In the hope that you get a return. So hope is fundamental to our economics. But all of it is built on this, and that is love. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to the hardship, that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For now we see only reflection as in a mirror, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I have had that passage read at every wedding I've ever performed, and I've never heard it read in a boardroom. But it should be. It should be. You see, love is at the center of our existence. Love has got to be at the center of our economics. And it's not the mawkish definition of love that we see on greeting cards, which is why people are so afraid to use the term love when it comes to business. It's the biblical definition of love. But the biblical definition of love isn't just these words, it's a symbol, and that symbol is the cross, which is the greatest act of love ever performed. And it is an act of selflessness where the most powerful sacrifice everything for the most needy. So, here's the thing. I don't think we're called to change the world. I get nervous when people say, I want to change the world. Because anybody who wants to change the world almost always wants to change it in their own image. Bonhoeffer said, God hates visionary leaders. Because Hitler was a visionary leader. But we do want to redeem it. And we can be carriers of these ideas and change the narrative. We can model it, we can talk about it, we can walk the walk, we can do whatever it takes to stand in solidarity with other people who believe that God can do the impossible if we ask Him to. And that means redeeming our economic system. So, we can do it from the bottom up. I have a whole chapter on it in the book. And we can do it from the top down. And this, I don't have time to unpack this. It's in the book. But at the end of the day, if you look at the epochs I spoke about earlier, traditional capitalism, modern capitalism, postmodern capitalism, if we want to get to the one on the right, if we want virtuous capitalism, we have to reimagine what the purpose of economics is. We need to reimagine how we're going to use capital, what the nature of work is, how we do these things, what's the ethic. These things are doable if we are willing to make different choices. So here's your next breakout assignment. Same groups, I want you to ask yourself this. How can these theological virtues of faith, hope, and love be applied to your understanding of the purpose of business? The purpose of business. The creation of wealth. Our civic responsibility and the common good. And whole life discipleship. How can those three virtues be applied that will affect you where you are on the ground today and those people within your circle of influence? Because remember, it's like when you throw a pebble in a pond. It starts in one space, but then it ripples out. Someone once said to me, never think that a bunch of people sitting in a room can't transform the world, because actually that's the only way it's ever happened. Individuals, churches, communities can start this process. So I want you to sit in your circles and ask, what does that mean? And how can we change that? We'll come back in 20 minutes, 20:15, we'll reconvene. Thank you.